Am I looking here?
You can look at me.
Oh, look at you. My name is Dr. Sireen Irsheid. I am a clinician, a social worker, and a professor at NYU. And my work looks at the intersection of structural violence, structural racism, mental health, and school-prison nexus. I grew up in Chicago, where a lot of the friends that I grew up with, a lot of friends that I went to school with, and I lived in the same neighborhoods with, also struggled where they got suspended, they got pushed out of school. I have a really, really close friend of mine that's currently serving a life sentence in prison. I have friends that are in and out of prison. I have some that are unfortunately no longer alive. And that really pushed me to go into this work to understand, I know they're good kids. We grew up in this similar environments. And so what is it, how do we disrupt these things? And so fast forward, I worked in schools where we provided support. And I was the school social worker for a lot of young kids that were similar to my childhood friends. And them too, and had been 20 years later, after I got all these degrees, 20 years later, they still got pushed out. I have one of my closest students who is currently serving a 15-year sentence in prison, right? And so that really talked and showed me that this is beyond just at the individual level. It's targeting our Black and brown babies. Right? And so that is what pushed me and motivated me to go back and get my PhD, to look at the school-prison nexus, but from a structural perspective, so that we can disrupt the mechanisms of inequity that are happening and that we can provide support to our young babies. Because essentially what's happening is that we're punishing our babies for structural racist policies that were created and that are being sustained over and over again. And so the best way to do it is to really think about policies and how do we disrupt these things, and even things like clinic kids, of how do we come to the schools and provide support at the individual level, at the structural level, at the organizational level. It's all well-rounded, and it's not just one direction, one way. It's not just at the individual level, but how do we come together to make sure that our babies are okay? So structural violence is whenever someone doesn't have access to things such as access to housing, affordable housing, stable housing, if they don't have resources in schools, right? If schools aren't well-resourced, that is all an example of structural violence. So these are violent systems that are impacting Black and brown communities. So that's what we think of structural violence, and structural racism is within the same category, and it's the way these policies really permeate and sustain these systems at play, and they impact Black and brown young people and families. The work is, it feels very smooth because the young people are excited. They want to be part of the clinic, and they are excited about the basketball coaches. They're excited about learning how to play basketball. And so we do mental health breaks where I teach them, small exercises that I would in like therapy sessions that I hold. So muscle relaxation or pace breathing or anything that I really pull from my therapy. And so they don't even realize that they're engaging in these practices. And this is something that they can use both on and off the court. So it's really smooth. It's not anything that I even feel like I have to extra prepare for, because it's received so well by the young people, by the parents, by the educators here. So I pull from different modalities, and I pull from things that I just kind of engaged with in my own therapy practice with my clients. And so certain things I pull specifically from cognitive behavioral therapy, from dialectical behavioral therapy. Some things I pull from is something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization theory, for instance, reprocessing theory. And then certain things I just pull from what I've learned over time working in schools as a social worker, what I learned in my own therapy practice of what I see young people and clients really bring up in the sessions. And I realize, okay, this is something that people are struggling with or engaging with. And so I see it here as well. So I go around when the coaches kind of introduce themselves and have the young people set their goals. One of my jobs is to go around with the young people and ask, what's something that you think might impact your ability to reach your goal, right? So very basic, simple question. And a lot of the responses I get are related to low self-esteem, feeling like they're not good enough, anger management, which is something that we went over today, right? Anger management, feeling angry, feeling upset, allowing it to take over. And that is something as adults, right, we need as well, and that we struggle with as well. And so that, again, I pull from things that I'm familiar with or things that I engage with in my therapeutic practice to make sure that they get the support that they need.
So how much do you think COVID impacted these kids? These kids who have been growing up in school, they had their online school. How much do you think it impacted them?
Oh my God. So a lot in many ways. So I would say even the younger generation already, because they grew up around technology and social media, that's already impacted them even besides COVID, right? Not being as social as, the previous generations. But once COVID hit, it really impacted everyone, not just our young kids, but everyone. Adults struggled, kids struggled. And so especially kids, if they don't have access to support, they don't have access to strategies, and they already aren't social, right? And they're already kind of behind a camera. It has increased their mental health challenges. It's increased anxiety. It's increased depression. It's decreased self-esteem. And I see this in my practice. I see this in my classroom. I see this here. I see it everywhere. And so COVID definitely played a role. So it's a couple things, but one of the most beautiful things about this clinic is that, it pushes against stigma. Right? And so the kids are here to have a good time, to be social, to learn basketball skills. And so in the breaks, when I'm teaching them a mental health break, so I'll give you the example of the pace breathing. So I teach them, we talk about when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling nervous in basketball, when you're about to make a free throw, you're about to take that final shot, right? And so they get nervous. But also, this shows up in school when they're about to take a test, if they're at home and they're feeling nervous, they're bothered, or whatever the situation is. So we talk both on the court and off the court. And I teach them how to do the pace breathing. And then in the mental health break, for instance, they all line up and they take a free throw shot. But before they take the free throw shot, they have to practice taking a deep breath in and out and shooting that shot. So we're putting it in practice. And so that is how we've combined both sports and mental health together. So the kids, they go home and they're engaging in these practices, not realizing they're learning all these therapeutic techniques that are super, super helpful for them.
So how do you benchmark the kids' progress? How do you see where they developed in?
Yeah, so we provide surveys. So we do pre-surveys and post-surveys. In the longer sessions, we'll have pre, mid, and post. And so pre will just ask about what are some of the skills that they engage in, how do they respond when they're upset or frustrated or anxious. And then post or the mid survey will ask, like, what are some of the strategies that you're using now? And then what are some of the strategies from clinic kids that you find yourself engaging with, so that we can see what is their progress, how are they doing. We also ask about their activity level, right? Were they physically active before they started? Do they find themselves engaging more in the physical activity now? And so that's really how we measure the benchmarks. So a lot of the kids come up to us, the parents have come up to us, and they say, our kids are practicing this at home. They're practicing our mantra, which is on the shirt. I'm confident, I'm committed, I'm resilient. So they're practicing it at home. Parents are noticing it. The kids are, they're saying, oh, I'm Miss Sireen, I'm using the muscle relaxation. I'm using my pace breathing. I'm using I teach them to challenge negative thoughts and reframe into positive thoughts. And so that, they've come up to me and they said, I've done this. We check in on them and say, give us examples of when you've done it. And they've given us examples of in school if they feel like they're not able to do well in an exam. And then they were able to identify their negative thought and then reframe it to more positive, and they did well.
What does each one mean? Can you describe how that means to these kids?
Yes. So the confident responds directly to the self-esteem, the challenges around self-esteem that a lot of the young people have expressed and that we've noticed and that we see. And we want them to be confident not only in sports, not only as they're on the court, but also outside, when they are engaging with their friends, when they are in school, when they're taking exams, when they're just socializing with folks, when they are thinking about their goals, as they prepare for next steps, as they go to high school, as they go to college, as they pursue the things that really mean something to them. So we want them to feel good about themselves and feel confident in whatever space that they're in. Committed is that it's not only, so we teach them, even when we teach them to reframe if they have a negative thought, for instance, you can say, okay, well, I feel like, I'll give you an example that a lot of the kids use, and they'll say, I was taking, I had an exam in math, for instance, and I told myself I wasn't going to do well, that I'm not good enough, right? And these are their words that they're using. And part of it is being confident that I can do this, I'm able to do it. But the second part is you have to commit to actually doing the work, right? You can say it, but you also have to combine it with committing. So that's part 2. So then they commit. They say, okay, I'm good enough, I can do this, I will pass. And now I'm going to commit to studying X, Y, and Z this many times, and then they pass, right? And then resilient is regardless of their story, regardless of the things that they've had to face, all of us have to face, but especially our young people, that they're still going to show up through and through, and they're going to be the best version of themselves. This question, one of my students just asked me this question in the class that I taught. So they asked me something along the lines of hope. You know, what is my view on hope? And honestly, sometimes, I'll be honest, it's hard. It's hard work because sometimes you face a lot of challenges, especially if you're trying to disrupt structural inequity, right, and structural harm. But my childhood friends and my former students who struggled, who were impacted by the system, are the ones that keep me motivated. And so my students who were formerly pushed out, who are in prison or struggling with homelessness, when I tell them, you know, they're like, oh, Miss Sireen, like, what are you doing at NYU? And I'll tell them, I said, you know, I have a project. I'm interviewing young people so that they can tell me about their lived experience, and I can center their story and understand how to disrupt these mechanisms. And when I share with them what I'm doing, even with clinic kids, they are so full of joy. And like their response, they're like, Miss Sireen, like, thank you. Like, we love you, and thank you for doing this work. And just hearing them say that is what allows me to keep doing this work no matter what I face, because I know that it even means a lot to them, it means a lot to me, and it's going to mean a lot to the future generations. Trends, self-esteem, low self-esteem. People are allowing, in my opinion, what I'm seeing, even in my therapeutic context of what's coming up in my therapy sessions, a lot of, not just young people, college age and a little older, but they see everything that's out on social media, right? And it's like, it provides this like false, perfect life. And so people feel like they have low self-esteem, or they have to chase this like perfect dream of whatnot, instead of like living in the moment and feeling confident about how they are and who they are and following their goals, and not letting the outside worlds impact them in that way, or not internalizing what's happening in the outside worlds. And to me, that's like a big trend that I've seen that's been happening. Of course, social media can play a positive role, but I think we need to teach our young people how to understand what is real and what's not real, and how do we improve their mental health and their self-esteem.